Greetings, salutations to Safe to Serve International and first-time viewers. Welcome to this midday power surge. I'm your host, Andrew Henriquez. We were live a few moments ago. We have returned. We're back. Let's get right into this. So as we're seeing there in Canada, life imprisonment if you present facts and truth. How is that going to affect God's people in the last days? Also in America, we're seeing the courts are about to rule on freedom of speech on media and social media platforms. Again, I ask, how will these laws and these issues affect God's people in the last days? Censorship of free speech, silencing free speech. This movement, it is a fulfillment of end-time prophecies. People are saying free speech, facts, truth are offensive. And we are being offended. As a result, we must curtail, trample upon liberty of conscience. Let's get right into this, because something is very startling is about to transpire. And by God's grace, I want to enlighten, awaken God's people, the world, so we all can be prepared physically, mentally, spiritually, socially, financially, for what is soon to break upon this world as an overwhelming surprise. Watch.
The Supreme Court heard arguments today in a highly consequential case navigating First Amendment protections on social media. Tech companies are taking on state laws decrying conservative censorship online. A decision here could fundamentally change the use of speech on the internet.
Speech. And just as in Matthew 24, Christ tells us in verse 3, verse 4, signs that would precede his second advent. And he mentions in verse 10, people are going to be offended. And the question is, do we see the fulfillment of this prophecy? Take a look at this. These two clips are actually individuals on both sides of the coin, of the issue. One is saying social media platforms should have the right to censor free speech. Watch.
Social media sites have a First Amendment right to curate and edit their sites according to their own curatorial and editorial philosophies and policies. That is a right that others in their position have, whether they be art curators or parade organizers.
The next clip represents those on the other side of the issue.
But our tech companies' publishers, Gura in the States, don't think so.
Whose speech is it? And nobody thinks that your speech is the company's speech. It's obviously your speech. If I pick up the phone and talk to you today, it won't be AT&T's speech. And AT&T can't unplug me because they don't like my politics.
Do you see that? And friends, now we're seeing very clearly what is now transpiring. This is a snippet from the arguments there at SCOTUS, U.S. Supreme Court. Notice what Justice Alito asked the lawyers. Define content moderation. Watch this.
Justice Alito?
There's a lot of new terminology bouncing around in these cases, and just out of curiosity, and one of them is content moderation. Could you define that for me?
So, look, content moderation to me is just editorial discretion. It's a way to take all of the content that is potentially posted on the site, exercise editorial discretion in order to make it less offensive to users and advertisers.
And Justice Alito didn't just accept that. He went on to ask this question. Is content moderation censorship? The lawyer responded, only if the government is doing it. But if private social media companies are doing it, it's not censorship. Watch.
Is it anything more than a euphemism for censorship? I want to just ask you this. If somebody in 1917 was prosecuted and thrown in jail for opposing U.S. participation in World War I, was that content moderation?
So if the government's doing it, then content moderation might be a euphemism for censorship. If a private party is doing it, content moderation is a euphemism for editorial discretion. And there's a fundamental difference between the two.
For editorial discretion, are you affirmatively saying, never mind, no further questions.
The justice had enough. Friends, I'm wondering if that exchange is going to remain on record. And later on in the proceeding, I'm wondering if the justice is going to bring up the content material I'm going to share with you right now. Remember, the lawyer just said, if it's the government doing it, it's censorship. Content moderation is censorship. What if I shared with you? The judges have already ruled that the U.S. government has been behind the scenes, working through the private social media companies, quote unquote, to content moderate, to censor speech that go against their sentiments. Watch this. There it is, friends. Judge orders Biden officials to limit contact with social media companies. Why? It's right there. They have been using the social media platforms to censor and to suppress speech. This is the most egregious violations of the First Amendment in the history of the United States of America. Well, this is Vivek Ramaswamy. Hear what he says about the most egregious threat to our freedoms in America.
I want to bring in my next guest, 2024 Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. Great to see you again, Vivek. Thanks for being here. So is the judge right here? Was this the biggest attack against free speech in our entire history?
The judge is absolutely right. And David, I was actually writing about this starting in January 2021, when along with my former Yale law professor, we were the first people to actually advance this legal theory. It was dismissed at the time, where what we said was if the government actors are using private companies to do through the back door what the government could not do through the front door, then those private companies are actually bound by the First Amendment. That bucks conventional wisdom because the First Amendment usually applies to the government. But
Yeah, that's true. Let's continue. Listen.
But it turns out if they're turning private companies into their pawns to be able to censor speech that's protected by the First Amendment, then that's still bound by the Constitution as well. This is the first landmark case in which a federal judge has come down on the side of that legal theory that I advanced 2 years ago, over 2.5 years ago, actually. And at that point, I think this is a major milestone for the protection of First Amendment freedoms of every American.
Friends. In other words, he's seeing it. And we need to share now who is actually behind the government and the government using the so-called private social media platforms as arms of the state to censor narratives that don't go along with mainstream media narrative. Watch carefully.
Because the most dangerous First Amendment threat
The most what?
Because the most dangerous First Amendment threat is not even the one that comes directly from the government, but one that comes from the government and is disguised to make you think that it was coming from a private company.
Well, and Vivek, they're really two.
Disguised. That's the most egregious threat. You think it's coming from the private social media companies, but in actuality, it's coming from the government. What about the fact it might be coming from the papacy, the Jesuits behind or on top of, as a puppet master, controlling the government, and from them, the quote-unquote private social media companies, just as this illustrates. Do you see that? The great puppet master. Yes. Do you see that? The mark of the beast is coming, MOB acronym. The mother of the beast, MOB, it's Popery, Jesuits. Look at her 8 tentacles. One of them we're now discussing is media of the beast. My wife says, since you're talking about content moderation, wink, wink, code word for censorship, it's actually not content moderation, but moderation of the beast, MOB. In this segment, I'm going to confirm Pope is behind all of it. Jesuits. There it is. What are we told? Last sentence. The people need to be aroused to resist the advances of this most dangerous foe to civil and religious liberty. Similar words from Vivek Ramaswamy. Continue. And what has been written in the encyclicals of papists? They despise the principles of freedom in the U.S. Constitution. Would that also entail freedom of speech? Look at this so-called politician stating, we must restrict freedom of speech for the common good. Common good? You wait until I play this. Watch.
When you think about it, all law, all legislation is about the restriction of freedom. That's exactly what we're doing here, is we are restricting freedom, but we're doing it for the common good. You will see throughout our Constitution, yes, you have rights, but they are restricted for the common good. Everything needs to be balanced. And if your views on other people's identities go to make their lives unsafe, insecure, and cause them such deep discomfort that they cannot live in peace, then I believe that it is our job as legislators to restrict those freedoms for the common good.
That wasn't just in passing. Over and over again, she reiterated, suppress freedom of speech for the common good. Do you think that just came out of thin air? Common good is whose? Social teaching. It's right there. Roman Catholicism, give up your rights. It's globalism, collectivism. It's mob rule. It's tyranny. It's totalitarianism. It's popery. And then will come Sunday worship by law. I will address that later on. Common good has become global in 2015, the Pope wrote and stated before the U.S. Congress, joint session of Congress, and before the UN. Selma Crump in the chat writes, that's it. The common good, which is the mantra of the beast, working on the acronym MOB, mantra of the beast. And remember, mantras may also lead to a person becoming disoriented. Yes. Hypnotized. Watch carefully now. And does popery, Jesuits have their own Inquisition board to censor speech, documents that contradict their so-called messages. Yes. It's still intact today. It was used against the Protestant reformers, even Martin Luther. This cannot be refuted, cannot be controverted. And why is it the Jesuit Pope is mingling in bed with social media giants? It's right there, friends. It's there. He's the one behind the scenes to take away freedoms on social media. Headline, silence those preachers on social media. Pause it right there. What we're talking about is not only something political. The environment is now being shaped that very, very soon, God's faithful preachers will not be allowed to present truth in the quote-unquote public square. Yes, knocking on doors to evangelize is the best method. And that's where we're going back to. However, social media, the media, stationary, traditional, modern media, should be used for evangelism. But right now, we are going to be outlawed and treated as pariahs of society. Watch carefully. That's what he says. Speech must be suppressed, not absolute. And the Pope says, if you speak against my mother, if you offend me, offend the mother church, offend our movement, you are going to receive the Pope's persecution's punch. That's what he says. Now, I'm going to transition on the same point. Don't offend my church. Suppress speech is the same rhetoric. Watch this. 1/3 of adults in America say the First Amendment goes too far. That's February 28th, 2024, 2 days ago. They say ban public speeches. Do you know why they say that? Last phrase. Because you are offending us. Blue words. Your words are offensive. Write down these two scriptures. In John chapter 15, verse 24, the Bible says, they hated me without a cause. Galatians chapter 4 and verse 16, am I therefore become your enemy because I have told you the truth? Watch this. Listen.
This morning, a crucial question takes center stage at the Supreme Court. How far can the government go in regulating political content on social media? The justices will hear arguments today about whether two laws passed in Republican-run states are constitutional, one from Florida, the other from Texas.
And some people say it's simply to regulate and moderate political speech. No, it's not. The next clip tells you. They're going to also censor religious speech. Watch this.
Supporters of these laws say social media platforms have been censoring users, especially those with conservative or religious views.
All right.
But tech companies argue they have a right under the First Amendment to set their own standards to prevent misinformation.
But what is Vivek Ramaswamy saying? And the judge is saying, since the government is using the quote-unquote private social media as the extension of the arm of the state, then they are bound as well by the Constitution of America. They cannot censor nor suppress. Galatians chapter 5. Do you see what's coming? Verse 11 says, and I, brethren, if I yet preach, why do I yet suffer persecution? Then is the offense of the cross ceased? Mercy. Presenting truth will make people feel offended. Do we see what time we're living in? It's preparation day. So all that we can do now for God, let us do it before it's too late. I will come back to America. Let's swing north of the border here in America to Canada. This is Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister. Is he also on a tirade? Yes, a satanic movement to suppress freedom of speech? Watch this.
What is the proper role for the feds? There's no question. I'm not up for debate on the value of journalism, but to what extent does government get involved here, and what are you prepared to do?
See, that's the big trick and the really, really tricky question right now, because there is out there a deliberate undermining of mainstream media. There are the conspiracy theorists, there are the social media drivers who are trying to do everything they can to keep people in their little filter bubbles, to prevent people from actually agreeing on a common set of facts, the way, the CBC and CTV, when they were our only sources of news, used to project across the country at least a common understanding of things.
You see my point? That does not need a commentary. Clip 2.
any government that chooses to step up and say, well, this is the mainstream view, will, if we're not careful, actually compromise those organizations as being mouthpieces for a mainstream view that people on the fringes are exactly.
Friends, that is nothing but slavery, mental slavery. You don't have liberty of conscience. You can't think for yourself, reason for yourself. What you must mentally consume must be given to you from the government. You don't have a choice to seek knowledge anywhere else. And the context are the crises mentioned in Matthew 24, verse 3, verse 4, verse 7 through verse 10. By the way, notice how it transitions from not only a movement to suppress speech, but also the right to assemble peaceably and to petition your government. In other words, the protest is over. There it is. You know what, friends? In Canada, it's now stating you can be imprisoned for life imprisonment for freedom of speech. Jailed, fined $20,000 life imprisonment. But all they tell you, we simply want to care for children online, and yet they sprinkle in it policies to suppress freedom of speech. And if you go against their narrative, life imprisonment. Watch this.
So, Rafi, this bill also proposes some criminal code changes.
The government wants to increase sentences for online incitement of hatred, specifically for promotion or incitement to genocide. That would mean a maximum sentence that goes up to life imprisonment from the current 5 years.
And can you take us through what happened?
Stop. Life imprisonment. And of course, they sprinkle in it some other things. But what is the objective? Life imprisonment. Imagine that. What's happening in America? What's happening in Canada? What's happening in the West? What's happening in the world? A transformation is taking place that will utterly persecute God's people. Are we ready for this? Watch this. Let him continue. Justin Trudeau.
Fighting back.
Protests, public protests are an important part of making sure we're getting messages out there, but using protests to demand changes to public policy is something that I think is worrisome.
Okay. So here we have the Prime Minister of Canada saying that, yes, we have a highly functioning democracy and they have the right and freedom to protest. However, if those protests are used to demand change in government policy, then no.
The small fringe minority who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing. Do not represent the views of Canadians who know that following the science and stepping up to protect each other is the best way to continue to ensure our freedoms, our rights, our values as a country.
Do you see it? Two things were connected there. Freedom of speech, and you cannot assemble to petition your government. Why would you assemble to petition your government? It's because you have been grieved, you're going through grievances, you want to redress those grievances. In a crisis, you don't have that liberty. That is not a country that provides freedom. That's mob rule, totalitarianism, that's communism, that's socialism, that's tyranny. That's what that is, globalism. And what was the actual issue, the controversy? The pestilence 19 pandemic. So what's going to happen when they roll out the next pandemic? And also catastrophes, so-called climate change. We haven't seen anything yet. Eileen in the comment section writes, they want to control our minds. Selma writes, it's mind control of the beast. Again, this is MOB, mind control of the beast. Listen.
As of today, a bank or other financial service provider will be able to immediately freeze or suspend an account without a court order.
If you are involved in this protest, we will actively look to identify you and follow up with financial sanctions and criminal charges.
Banks have already started to freeze the accounts of people involved in the protests.
Please get out. Immediately get out. Intimidating people in a church during the Passover. Unbelievable.
Growing up under communist dictatorships, I have been warning Canadians that that's what's coming. I could smell it. I could see it at every corner. We will not put up with this anymore. We are fighting back.
Beloved, do we see what's coming? We just saw a foretaste of this. And now notice what we're told. In the book Great Controversy, page 606, the scenes of Babylon must be laid open so people can flee from Babylon. Babylon slavery. Revelation 18, verse 1 through verse 4. And Babylon slavery in verse 11 through verse 13, which is totalitarianism. We have to call people from Babylon, but their sins, diabolical policies, and the tyrants must be exposed. But they'll call us hate preachers. And that's how church and state are going to unite. And the merchants to fine, prosecute, imprison, even martyr some of God's people, to silence speech, to silence the protest. All right. In the book Great Controversy, the next paragraph, page 607, we're told some of God's people are going to be imprisoned. It's right there. Fines and imprisonment. And what is happening now in Canada? Life imprisonment. If that does not awaken you, I'm not sure what else will. Life imprisonment. And we see the same in the life of Christ. In John chapter 11, verse 47 through verse 53. Did they not imprison Christ? Why? To silence speech, the truth, the facts, to silence Christ's protest. Put down Acts chapter 4, verse 18 through verse 21. The leaders of church and state said to Christ's disciples, did we not tell you not to preach in this man's name? Don't preach and say these words to silence freedom of speech. The disciples said in Acts 4 and Acts chapter 5 and verse 29, we ought to obey God rather than men. You mean life imprisonment for preaching truth? On page 609 in the book Great Controversy, many are going to say, if we knew that this would be the consequence and consequences for presenting truth, we would have held our peace. Life imprisonment for presenting facts and truth and to expose tyranny and the tyrants? I don't believe the majority of us really comprehend the signs of these last days. It's preparation day, my friends. It's preparation day. Now, SCOTUS is going to rule in the summer. Watch this.
This case could have far-reaching implications from what you see about the presidential election to even how spam is regulated. The justices are expected to issue a ruling by this summer.
By when? Friends, many people don't understand. Regardless of what SCOTUS rules summer of 2024, as it relates to content moderation, censoring free speech, here is the point I'm making. If SCOTUS rules in our favor, you cannot censor, allow speech, regardless of who is offended. In a crisis, SCOTUS can rescind that ruling. In a crisis, your liberties are suppressed. Is that point clear? Watch this.
Actually, Rachel, I think we're more susceptible to it than other countries. And that's because some of our greatest strengths can also be our Achilles heel. So, for example, our deep commitment to free speech in our First Amendment. It is a cherished right. It is an important right in democracy, and nobody wants to get rid of it. But it makes us vulnerable to claims that anything we try to do to regulate speech is censorship. Of course, the Supreme Court has held that all fundamental rights, even the right to free speech, can be limited as long as there is a compelling governmental interest and the restriction is narrowly tailored to achieve that interest.
That's it. In a crisis, SCOTUS can repeal, renege. Martial law, the mandates. Beloved, here is a prime example. What happened during the pestilence 19 pandemic? Look at your screen right now. Federal judge strikes down mask mandate. And when did she strike down the mask mandate? April 19th, 2022. April 18th, 2022. But my friends, the mask mandate went into effect April 2020. Here's my point. It was a crisis. Take away their freedoms. Make mandates. Afterward, the government said, now, we apologized. The mandates were unconstitutional. Wait a minute. After 700 and 45 days, the government says, now we apologize. The mandates were unconstitutional. How many people suffered during the 745 days? How many people died as a result of those mandates within 745 days? How many people lost their businesses? How many people lost their jobs, laid off? How many were sick to the point of death? How many people could not go to the bedside of their sick and dying loved ones within 745 days? And all the government could say afterward, we apologize. The mandates were unconstitutional. Do you see my point? So in that sense, summer 2024, ruling from SCOTUS, what's the big deal? Because we know in a crisis, you won't have any rights. Watch this. It's right there. It says, red words underlined, that the CDC, all right, the government, the medical arm exceeded its authority and failed to follow proper rulemaking procedures. So if they had followed the right procedure, they would have said, the mandates and stripping away your rights is constitutional. What date? April 3rd, 2020, the mask mandate. From both sides, both parties. April 3rd, underline red, 2020, Democrat. April 3rd, 2020, mandates, Republican. No option, no freedom. And what happened on top? April 18, 2020. Now it was ruled to be unconstitutional after 745 days. That's your calendar. That's it. April 3rd, 2020 to April 18, 2022 is 745 days of suffering, sickness, misery, mental trauma, death. And what did they say afterwards? Oh, we simply apologize. It was unconstitutional. Before I address not just the mask mandate, but the prick mandate, forcing you to be pricked against your conscience. If you want to be pricked, go ahead. Give us the right. You want to wear a mask? Go ahead. Don't force me against my conscience. Imagine when they put into effect the law to kill God's people, when the mark of the beast is enforced, the wicked unrepentant, the death penalty, and they die at the second coming of Christ, right? After 1,000 years, the second resurrection takes place, the resurrection of the wicked, and now they arise in the resurrection of damnation, and now they see the laws they enacted against Christ, against his followers, even life imprisonment, the death penalty. Will they now apologize? Yes, they will. Philippians 2, verse 5 through verse 11. Every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess. We apologize. What we did was unconstitutional. What we did was unchristlike. But that apology would have been too late. 1,000 years too late. 1,000 plus. Is the point clear, my friends? Let's come now to the prick mandate. There it is, friends. Watch. Supreme Court blocks nationwide vaccine and testing mandate. You see it now? It was blocked, but when? January 2022. But when did it go into effect? All the way back in the year 2020? 6-3 decision from SCOTUS. You can read that. I have no time for that. Don't force your employees. And folks were saying it's a win for liberties. That's it. A win for freedom. Was it really a win? What's going to happen in a crisis? What's going to happen in a crisis? There it is. But they said, while it is unconstitutional to force employees, there are some people in the medical field. They must abide by the mandate. It's right there on your screen. And then they said, we outlawed the mandate because some people will say, for medical reasons, I refuse the prick. For religious reasons, I am going to refuse the prick. Do you not know? Now they have a prick that's plant-based. They have all the bases covered, my friends. All the bases covered. There it is. Most people, red words, who object to the prick do so for religious or medical reasons. Religious, medical. Look at this now. Listen.
Researchers have just launched a late-stage clinical trial on a whole new kind of COVID-19 vaccine, one that's grown in plants. They're looking for volunteers in San Diego. We're going in depth on what you might call the world's first vegan vaccine.
Yeah. I covered this 2 days ago.
Medicago says its COVID vaccine could become the first of its kind grown in plants. Past virus-like particle vaccines were grown in bacteria or yeast. A small phase 1 study found this COVID vaccine produced 10 times as many antibodies compared to people infected with the real.
Coming. Now, here's the point I want to get at. In the exchange on the floor,
but something a lot of us.
Listen what he said. Let me give you that. I don't want this one.
Now, Representative Scott Sapicki says researchers in California have perfected putting vaccines into certain foods. So he's crafted a bill to make sure that you know whether you're picking up a tomato with a vaccine in it or not. As an example, now basically he says that this is a consumer protection bill that will make sure you know what you're buying. He says before this comes to Tennessee, there needs to be safety measures in place to protect you when you shop for yourself and your family.
That's February 26th, 2024. Here is the exchange I want now. Listen to this.
Chairman Clements. And is that even legal to do in the state of Tennessee?
It doesn't matter if it's legal. In a national crisis, they'll trample upon your rights. That's the point I want to drive home. Give it to me.
Chairman Clements. And is that even legal to do in the state of Tennessee, to sell those with a vaccine in them?
You recognize? I'm not arguing that point. What I'm saying is there is no law deeming those that when you go into a grocery store, you should know as a consumer, this head of lettuce is a head of lettuce. The head of lettuce right next to it could contain a vaccine in it. All we're saying is if it does have the vaccine in it, make sure it's listed as a pharmaceutical so people can get the proper dosage.
And now they're telling us disease X is going to be rolled out. The WEF, the Jesuits also. It's coming. More fatal than the recent pandemic. Do we see what is on the horizon? In the chat, we have David writing, it gives a whole new meaning to GMO. Hillary writes, plant-based poison or animal. What's that? Or animal-based poison. Doesn't matter. She writes, it's all poison. I'm going to close with this, friends. Very, very important. Asunder law, the mark of the beast, will be enacted. And when that is enacted, based on Revelation 13, verse 11 through verse 18, you see a death penalty. You can't buy or sell except you receive the mark of the beast. Listen attentively. For that to take place, there has to be a national crisis. Because then they can say, we have to suppress liberty of conscience. If that's clear, type in the words amen in the chat. Revelation 13, 11 through verse 18. That's how America will speak as a dragon. It's already on the books, right there. From SCOTUS, 2 paragraphs, they can enact Sunday to combat national crises, and they say it is constitutional to force people to go to church on Sunday. Oh, but we are offended. I want to close by saying this. In Proverbs 27 and verse 6, the cry now is, oh, free speech is offending me, what the Bible says. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. Which one would you rather have? Send in the comment. Which one would you rather have? My friends, someone sent me this note. My personal motto is this: I'd rather offend you into heaven than to flatter you into hell. In Matthew 15, verse 12 through verse 14, the disciples came to Christ. Lord, state leaders, church leaders are offended by what you're teaching and preaching. Did Christ apologize? He said, let them alone. They be blind, leaders of the blind. And if the blind follows the blind, if the blind also leads the blind, both will fall in a ditch. They are not God's people. They will be uprooted. And today's Friday. The last words of Christ that Thursday night into Friday morning before he was placed on that cross and crucified. To silence truth and the protest, he said to all 11 disciples, tonight the shepherd shall be smitten. Tonight you all shall be offended. That's an issue for the last days. And what did Peter say? Oh, though all men should be offended, not me. And the other 10 said the same thing. But what did Christ say? You will deny me 3 times. The cock will crow twice. If you want to be ready, come, watch and pray in Gethsemane. Yet what were they doing? Sleeping. What a presentation today on this preparation day. Are we going to be found watching and praying? Or are we going to be found sleeping physically and spiritually? May the prayer of Christ be our prayer. Not my will, but thy will be done, Lord. Take away this bitter cup. I feel weak to meet the coming crisis. Not my will, but thy will be done. Is this your prayer today? And when Christ prayed that prayer, an angel came to strengthen him for the crisis. We don't need to be fearful. Find yourself in Gethsemane, your prayer closet. Pray those words sincerely, and God will strengthen you today and when that crisis hits. By God's grace, I'll see you tomorrow beginning at 10 a.m. Eastern for our Sabbath service. Give this video a thumbs up. If you have not yet, please subscribe. I would appreciate all of you if you share this video far and wide. Why? The Lord is soon to come. We must be prepared. Get others prepared. And remember, the protest continues. We must obey God rather than men. Happy Sabbath.